Okay, so the thing is, if you to make this sort of a shorter video, because the last one was 9 minutes long, borderline personality disorder, what it means is that it sits on the borderline of the personality spectrum. So everybody is going to have a continuum because every person has a personality. All right, it comes with unnatural genetic makeup. All right, so with that is connected to emotions. With that is connected to anything that could even be hereditary that would affect our development. Okay, and so personality does develop as we are little and we grow up. Personality can also change depending on the circumstance. For example, if you are living in a country or a city where you grew up, and maybe you are quite introverted and making friends kind of came easy, but you don't have a lot of them, and you went from school to university to getting a job in the same city, and then you decide you're going to move country, in a way to build up support and to learn the new language or learn the new culture and adapt yourself, you would have to become a little bit more social, so that you're actually intentionally going out to different places and meeting people, and you're intentionally making connections, and you're intentionally being part of their community. Because the people who grew up here, it came naturally, so they go with each other to school, to a university and all these things, and they make all these friends, and then they find their person that they want to marry in their city, and so it just happens naturally. So when you move to a new city, when you move to a new country, you have to intentionally put yourself into that social environment. You have to intentionally join the language course that they offer. If you live in a country that's got a foreign language, all these things, you have to intentionally put yourself out there, and usually that is it's seen as an extroverted quality where you're looking for connections, and so you have to be social, and you have to be considerate of people, and you have to be somebody who speaks, but you've also got to be somebody who listens to other people and what they're saying. And so your personality might change depending on the season, might change depending on the situation. Could even go the other way, where generally you love people, but for that particular season, it's a difficult season. Maybe finance, maybe emotional, maybe you burnt out, maybe you lost somebody that you love, and you actually don't want to be around people, and it lasts for 6 to 8 months. And it's part of the personality where your introversion might come out more than your extroversion. And that is considered personality adjustment, personality differentiation, okay? What I have learned is that there's different aspects of personality that have been researched, and since I've studied, there's been a couple more versions of extroversion and introversion that have been published, and so I find that very interesting. But what happens with the borderline is that it sits on the base, or in the middle piece between rational and irrational, and it's got to do with emotions. Okay, so keeping in mind, this is not a criticism, this is not a negative thing. What it is the description of what borderline would look like to somebody on the outside if you may be watching them. And it depends, because you might be full on borderline and have all 9 traits, or you might only have 5. You might, and you need 5 of those 9 in order to be diagnosed that way. Okay, and this information I have found online. Okay, I have ordered books and bought books on personality and on disorders that help me to understand. So this isn't new knowledge that nobody has ever seen before. So if you go and research and you go Google it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But what I'm doing is I'm just explaining, because I'm explaining what I've learned about it, because I'm fascinated by it. And it's sometimes, for some people in the research they've done, they define it as an emotional irregularity. So it's having strong feelings, accustomed to being grey area with your feelings or neutral with feelings. It's and emotions. It's something that's on the borderline between rational and irrational. Okay, and this is why it's called borderline. I don't know why specifically people use the word borderline, although I partly do understand because it's on the border between rational, irrational, illogical, but there has been research known to have a better name for it. But basically it's emotional dysregulation. And so the person has to work harder than the average person to regulate their emotions. I do think that there's a chemical imbalance because in the person's brain because of depression, because of anxiety and all these things. But what it is that there's a stuntedness in the person's growth of adapting emotionally to situations. So what it is in itself is emotional dysregulation, but it can come with depression, it can come with anxiety, it can come with other factors that would contribute to or would be related to a chemical imbalance, which is why a lot of the time research I've done, people who have borderline are on medication for depression, on medication for managing their anxiety, on medication for helping them focus because their thoughts are either blurred or all over the place. Okay, so one of the reasons I want to talk about it is because it can cause problems in relationships. It depends on the person. A friend of mine when I was growing up who did have it, and I saw it before she got diagnosed, but I don't know what it was. I just saw things that I considered were strange, like a strange way of thinking or strange comments or strange insecurity. Then I thought, okay, this for me, I deemed it as strange because of what I'd read about personalities on the spectrum and how people adapt. And I'd seen people who don't really have a lot of emotions, and I've seen people who are very sensitive, and I know I've got a lot of emotions and I'm very sensitive. So I was having a look at how she was behaving and the choice of words she was using and seeing her in different contexts. And then she got diagnosed because a friend of hers and her parents were like, I think we need to go to a psychiatrist. And she was early 20s when that happened. And she went to a psychiatrist and she was shocked. But she said that once she was on the medication and she was talking about things that bothered her, she could see more and more and more why people would feel like she needs to talk to somebody. Why, on being on the medication to help with the depression, how your moods shift because the medication helps you. And seeing a change in behavior, her realizing she didn't realize that the way she was reacting was not necessarily healthy or normal, what society or psychiatrists would consider normal. And it's interesting because it made sense once she was in talk therapy and once she was getting medication. But she was like, it didn't occur to her that something is so wrong that you need to talk to somebody about it, or that there might be a chemical imbalance. And this is another reason why it's interesting for me, because as much as it is emotional dysregulation, she didn't recognize that her emotions were strange, which was interesting for me, because because I have met people with borderline who are very emotionally connected. They have healthy emotional intel for themselves and other people, even though their emotions are dysregulated. They'll recognize what they feel, why they feel it, and then they'll have to learn to manage it. So it was interesting for me because I was learning a lot just by watching her go from not knowing what it is and reacting to certain things and speaking a certain way and then getting help for it. And it was just that she was still living at home, that her parents said, we are doing this, and she was somebody who did what her parents told her to do. So she went into medication, and that's when she started reading about what borderline is. And she didn't necessarily see it as a negative